So I 19, a female, quit my lousy job at a fast food chain that has a certain arch recently and remembered this story, which I thought was funny. Unfortunately, this is a very true story. I know it's a bit ridiculous. We had these regulars that would come through the drive-thru nearly every day, and I was always the one handing food out the window. They were an older couple, and I was happy to make accommodations to allow handing them food and drinks easier. However, it became increasingly difficult to allow their unpleasant attitude towards me. For context, my branch of the restaurant was one of 5 in my town, but the rest were 20-ish minutes away. We were the worst rated as we were small but extremely busy as a result, and run by literal teenagers half the time. Lunch and dinner rushes were a mess as managers were more concerned with stats than actually running the place well. This couple would come through at our busiest time, order the same thing, shouting at the order taker, payment window, and me for how slow we were. Our small kitchen was unable to accommodate how busy we got, so wait times were often 300 plus seconds, supposed to be 120. Every time they'd yell at me for how busy we were, how slow, how their food would be cold, how it wasn't fair to make an old couple wait, and every time the man would ask for extra cream on his latte, and if he didn't get it, he would become upset. I would do it for him, because I'd learned to take the bullet for taking too long rather than deal with this guy. So much so he would call me his creamy girl, with a grin on his face, and every time I'd laugh, but explain that it wasn't appropriate. On this day, I was maybe 16/17, we were flat out busy and 600 plus seconds, when the cream couple arrived. I asked them to pull into a bay, and we would bring the food out so we could serve the next customer, whose order was prepared. He went ballistic on me, refusing to move, shouting at me, slamming his hands on the dashboard, classic temper tantrum, and refusing to move. This went on for so long, I started explaining to my manager the issue, who wouldn't take nonsense, the situation, and she phoned the authorities to remove the guy. This is usually enough of a threat to get the customer to go, but not this time. He said something along the lines of, "Every time I come here, we have to wait and my cream melts. And every time we come here, you're working. You are an unpleasant person." I'm not the kind of person to take nonsense from people, you get the energy you give, but up until now I had been forgiving. So I blurted out while he was yelling at me, "So? Go somewhere else, it's called problem solving, dude." He was stunned before lashing out again, explaining this place was his only option and there was nowhere I could make him go anywhere else. So I said, "Wanna bet?" Latte and extra cream in hand, I poured the coffee all over the roof and window of his Fiat Panda. Edit to clarify, I was going to pour it out the window, but he was parked too close, but as I was thinking about it, I realized that I could safely pour it onto his car window and roof and not burn him. I then asked him again to pull around, and his order would be ready soon, and slammed the window. I then promptly burst into tears out of exhaustion and dislike and began making my way to my manager to tell her my mistake. The authorities turned up basically straight after. We explained what was going on while Cream Man was trying to open the window. They asked him to go and explained he was now trespassing if he didn't go. Long story short, the next thing I saw was this 70+ man swinging at this officer before quickly getting put into the police car, leaving his very frail wife still sat in shock, latte-less. Did this man deserve to get arrested? Probably not. Was it appropriate for me to pour coffee on his car? Maybe, maybe not. You decide if I'm the jerk if you want. Either way, it felt good. Plus, I didn't lose my job.
So, about 20 years ago, I worked for a lawn care company, applying fertilizer and weed killer. One day, I was in a posh neighborhood doing a lawn treatment. After doing my job, putting down fertilizer and spot spraying the weeds, I'd usually place pesticide treatment flags, one in each corner of the lawn. It was my usual routine. The homeowner was around that day watching me work. I noticed him watching me through the windows as I did the entire treatment. Once finished, I left as usual. However, when I got back to the shop, the secretary told me the homeowner was upset. He complained about there being no flags in the middle of his lawn. I was surprised and assured them I did my job. I mentioned he watched me do it, but he never said anything to me. I figured maybe he didn't want to confront me as I'm a big guy, and he looked smaller. My boss and the secretary found it amusing and suggested I return the next day. They advised me to redo the weed treatment and put out more flags. So the following day, I made sure to flag every inch of his yard. I grabbed a bundle of flags and marked the lawn every few steps, ensuring complete coverage. By the time I finished, his lawn was covered in flags. When I got back to the shop, my boss and the secretary were chuckling. They mentioned the homeowner had called again. I just said, "Well, he knows for sure I got his whole yard now, right?" We all had a good laugh, and they said they told him the same. I believe in talking things out. If you have an issue, discuss it. But if you prefer to hassle a lady over the phone, enjoy picking flags out of your yard all day.
The day of my 28th birthday, I wound up in the ER because all weekend long I'd been dealing with nausea, dizziness, fever, and lower right quadrant abdominal pain that all just kept getting worse. When I got back to see a doc, I described my symptoms, for the umpteenth time of course, since they never seem to read the notes, and the doc orders a CBC before he even starts the exam. He of course then starts poking and prodding at my abdomen, which I do my best to relax and breathe through. I still wind up making pain noises, but I do my best to let him do the exam without hurting him back. I know that other women can verify that annual physicals can be extremely painful for some of us, but we've learned to deal with it. For me, I was told that tensing up would make it worse, so I should practice breathing through the exam and doing my best to relax my whole body. By 28, I'd had lots of practice. You'll see why I mention it very shortly. The doctor went off to do whatever he needed to do while he waited for the blood work to come back. Once he read the report, he wandered back over to me. He tells me that my white cell count was only slightly elevated and that, since I wasn't tensing up much when he was poking and prodding, that he didn't think it was appendicitis. I explained to him my history of painful exams and also let him know that my body likes to hide things. For example, I was dealing with massive back pain, and they only found out that my back was actually broken when they decided to go in and do a fusion. It never showed on the scans. Fast forward past about 20 minutes of arguing back and forth. "Doc, I could go in and do an exploratory, but if I'm gonna do that, I may as well just take out your appendix while I'm in there." Me, "Okay, let's do that. I have a request though, can I have my appendix in a jar so I can see it?" "Doc, sure, I can do that, no problem." I wind up in surgery at 4 a.m. the next day. Once I'm fully awake after surgery, the nurse tells me what happened. I guess they didn't care much for this doc's attitude either. The day after that, the doc is doing rounds, with med students in tow, and comes to my room, Q petty revenge * me, "Hey doc, where's my appendix?" "Doc, I'll come back later and talk to you about it." Me, "You're here now, just tell me." "Doc, well we got lucky." Me, "How so?" "Doc, we managed to get it out right before it burst." Me, "Well. I guess you'll learn to pay more attention to what your patients tell you instead of acting like you know everything just because you have a medical degree."
Back in the 1980s, my dad ran a research lab at a U.S. government hospital that was also attached to a large university. My dad's boss, Dr. Bill, was a lovely person, a competent, compassionate doctor who eventually rose to become chief of medicine at the hospital. One of Dr. Bill's duties was to vet the new postdocs. In this case, a postdoc was someone who had typically just graduated from medical school with their doctorate and was beginning research duties at the hospital/university. Although the new doctors were very intelligent, Dr. Bill noticed that a lot of the postdocs had terrible bedside manners. The newly fledged doctors rarely listened to their patients and often treated the nurses and lower staff poorly. The new doctors were, frankly, both rude and very full of themselves. Their attitudes were wreaking havoc with patient and staff morale, and complaints were piling up. Dr. Bill was having none of it. He was never one to shout or give long lectures. Instead, he came up with his own patient intake questionnaire. He sent each new postdoc to my dad for practice, instructing them to verbally question my dad and write the answers down themselves. Have you ever been exposed to polio? Have you ever been exposed to smallpox? Have you ever been exposed to anthrax? Have you ever been exposed to DDT? Have you ever been exposed to HIV? The list was extensive: banned pesticides, exotic diseases, poisons. My dad answered yes to every question. After the first couple of yeses, most postdocs would stop paying attention to my dad and just circle no all the way down the page. They'd perfunctorily thank my dad and leave to find Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill would look at a questionnaire filled with no S and ask the postdoc how the interview had gone. "Fine, Dr. Bill." So, Dr. Bill would reply, "You must know the patient grew up on a farm in the 1930s and 40s. You know he went to veterinary school in the 50s. You know he's been in deadly contagious disease research since the 60s. All reasons why an individual in the 1980s would have legitimately said yes to all questions." Dr. Bill would rip them up, down, and sideways. You listen to the patients. You ask them follow-up questions. And you treat the rest of the staff with respect. Or you are through at this hospital. The postdocs would shrink a little smaller with each statement. Their egos, usually so pronounced, would deflate all the way down. They looked like fools, and they knew it. Most of them shaped up to Dr. Bill's standards of patient care. Those who didn't were let go. Over the years, the experienced postdocs got a lot of joy out of seeing the new postdocs sweat it out. My dad just loved playing the innocent patient. And Dr. Bill got, if not more compassionate doctors, then at least more thorough ones. I was at the auto parts store today and I saw something I saw a lot when I worked there back in college. The guy in front of me was huffing and puffing about waiting too long and how the workers needed to hurry up. He made rude comments that everyone could hear and was just unpleasant. When he got to the front of the line, he was still rude and asked for the parts he needed. The parts guy asked a basic question about the type of car he had, and the guy didn't know. After a little while looking through his phone, he decided he needed to call someone to have them check the car. I said, "Do you mind helping me real quick while he's on the phone?" The guy got all mad and started a rant about me cutting and how long he waited. The parts guy, however, smiled and moved to a different computer to help me. Since I was the last person in line, I took my sweet time, knowing the impatient guy had to wait for me. Even once the other parts guy was done with his customer, he just left, claiming he had to do something in the back. I was there around half an hour just to get some fluids and a couple other little things. The guy waited the whole time until he finally left in a huff. Coincidentally, that was just before I happened to be ready to pay.